Okay, we're live, Alexander. We have the well, we always start with the pixelated, Alexander, but it'll clear up and it'll become the clear. It'll be the clear oracle soon.
It'll be the clear oracle.
Yeah.
Well, the oracle of Delphi, unlike me, was always very obscure. It sort of covered itself in mist and it spoke in riddles. Well, I'm afraid the mist, the pixelation has nothing to do with me. And I hope
have you been to Delphi?
Many times, absolutely, and Olympia. By the way, of the two sites, I actually prefer Olympia. I think Olympia is an extraordinary place, and it's not too far from the part of the world where my family originated. And there's still a branch of my family nearby who own a large vineyard. So if you see,
cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got connections with that part of the world.
Great. All right, welcome everybody to a live stream, a Monday live stream. We were going to do a Friday, but we had other time constraints going on, and we did a premiere, and the premiere went really well, Alexander. And I think everyone enjoyed. Yeah, everyone enjoyed the premiere, and we had some super chat questions from the premiere, which I'll answer, which we'll answer in about like 5 minutes. But we'll do a quick live. You're a little bit under the weather today as well, Alexander, so rest up and get better. and what else? What are you looking at this week, Alexander? Well, it's also kind of slow. I don't want to say it's a slow news week ahead, but things are,
I think it's one of those strange weeks where there's an awful lot going on under the surface, but it's not visible perhaps to the world. So I mean, we've had this Chinese hypersonic glide vehicle test, which I think is a big event. Actually, I certainly spooked the Americans. The Chinese are having a wonderful time about it. They've been teasing the Americans all about it. They said, "Oh, this is an efficient way to travel into space," and they're implying it's all a civilian vehicle. I mean, we don't need to take any of that very seriously. But as I said, that's what they've been up to. We have a steady deterioration of the situation between Russia and Europe. Just before we did this program, we learned that the Russians are suspending all political contacts with NATO, diplomatic and political contacts with NATO. And this comes directly after a ferocious article by Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian president, on Ukraine, which I've discussed in a video that I've done on Locals, and I would strongly urge people who want to know that to go on Locals, and you can see it there and join our community there. And there's also, of course, a further interview, which I'm also going to do a program probably on Locals which is about this statement from the Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov in an interview with French television, in which he says that for Russia, Ukraine joining NATO is a red line, and Russia will take active measures if it ever happens. In other words, he's basically implying that it'll mean a war. So that's so a lot going on that front. Still a deterioration of the situation. The strategic situation is getting very difficult, and I've just done a program for my own channel, which you'll see, which I discuss some of the implications of this Chinese nuclear test. There's a lot going on, and we have to be incredibly careful in the United States as well. I mean, a certain orange man's recent rally has spooked a lot of people, and I think that's something we need to say. I'm afraid we have to be very careful what we say, because our friends and masters are keeping always careful watch on what we say on Locals. Again, we can be absolutely forthright about this. I've been reading some unbelievable articles, some suggestions, for example, that legal action be taken against the orange man to prevent him standing on in 2024. And there's some of the things people are saying, are just apocalyptic. I mean, the language some people are using is apocalyptic. But of course, all of that is connected to a crisis of confidence that's now happening within the United States itself, within the Democratic Party, as the wheels come off this administration, which basically isn't a functional administration at all. So that's, I think, the other big story. So there's a general deterioration in the international situation. There is a festering political crisis in the United States. There's an economic crisis overall. The Europeans are nowhere, doing nothing. And there are all kinds of regional conflicts around the world. So it's not no particular big event you can point your finger at and say, this is the topic we're going to discuss, but lots of things happening under the surface.
No, yeah, China's that's huge. I heard they're denying it though. The hypersonic, they've come out with statements where they've denied some of it. And anyway, we have that. We have Russia. I mean, in Europe, there were a lot of protests because October 15th kind of is the day when a lot of mandates went into effect. The yellow vests are back out again as well. Inflation, fuel prices going up.
Food prices are going up too, and fuel shortages in many places, in China, in Britain, in India, in all sorts of places as well. All of that, by the way, going to feed into further inflation spikes come the winter. As I said, we could be seeing much higher inflation in a few months than what we've seen already.
Yeah, CNBC though says inflation is good for wages.
Well, that's an interesting, that's an interesting contribution to economic science. Let me put it like that.
So they're a financial publication as well. But the United States is deteriorating, Alexander. It really is. That's the image that I'm getting, and I find it really, really funny that they're concerned about Orange Man while you have Biden, the Biden administration, just running the country into the freaking ground, and that is what they're doing. They're running the country into the ground, and they're worried about Orange Man. It's stunning.
It is stunning, but it's also very, very, very typical. Of course, if you believe some of the, if these people, the way they talk about him were sincere, well, I mean, the way they talk about him, the hysteria they have is just, well, basically off the.
That's because they have nothing else.
Exactly.
That is all they have, is that hysteria. That's all they have to hold on to.
Exactly. Yes.
That's all they have to. I don't even want to say unify their support. I don't even think Orange Man can unify the Democrats or the left at this point anymore.
I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah. So anyway, let's do some questions that we had from the premiere, Alexander. Thank you to everyone that's joining us. I saw people from the UK, from Belgrade, Serbia, Denmark, China, the US, Switzerland, Indonesia, Germany, from all over the world. Thank you very much from Iran, from there's a Let's Go Brandon in the live stream as well. Let's Go Brandon, my God. From Russia, from South Africa. Thank you for joining us, everybody from St. Paul de Vence. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to our moderators. I see we have a lot of our moderators. Those blue wrenches are in the live stream as well. Alan, Valies, Reckless Abandon, Cosmic Rain, Zariel. Who else? I think I got everybody that's moderating as well. Thank you very much to our moderators. Thank you to Lot, who's a new member to the community as well. Alexander, let me open up some of the comments that we had from our premiere. And we start with Amrit, who said that Italy is the new market leader in big lathe machine tools. Pietro Carnegie, 60% market share required for nuclear reactor components production and other machines, but don't produce nuclear power themselves anymore. They supply to Rosatom. So Italy makes stuff for nuclear reactors, but they don't do any of it.
Well, because they're in the grip of the kind of policies that the European Union imposes on them, so they're not able to run their own industrial strategy. And of course, they're affected by the green attitudes, which are deeply hostile to nuclear power. So, you build the machines to build these things, but you don't build them yourself. You sell your machines to other countries. I don't know which countries, China, South Korea, Japan, who knows? And no doubt they're busy building the reactors instead. So, it's a classic example of how industrial policy today in the West is being managed. It's being managed very much now under ideological and, shall we say, political criteria.
Yeah. Italy run and ruled by the central banker, Draghi, the unelected central banker. From Ian, he says, with the world economy as it is, would Trump's economy survive, bringing back jobs and production from China?
Very difficult for me to give an answer to that question. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I suspect that these problems that we've seen now would need to run their course. But the one thing that would make a difference, and which a new administration, which came into this thing without the ideological baggage of the present one thing it could do is that it could start to put out this monetary fire that's been lit. What is driving the inflation, the worldwide inflation, is that the United States government and the Federal Reserve Board started pumping an already rapidly expanding economy with money. They just poured money into it. Now, I don't know whether Trump would reverse that or would stop it. The momentum behind continuing to do that now is extremely strong. But if the United States government were to rein in its spending significantly, and I mean actually carry out cuts, we would start to see shifts in the inflation situation around the world, I suspect, pretty fast. But there would be a recession. And that's exactly what, of course, they don't want to see happen.
It's hard to see how much further Biden's going to wreck things, the Biden White House, because we never imagined in 7 months they would bring the U.S. to this level that it is right now. I mean, they've done an incredible job of wrecking things. So would Trump be able to turn it around? I don't know, Alexander. If Biden continues at this pace,
well,
I really have doubts.
Well, indeed. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, if we're talking about 4 years, I mean, we still got 3 years of this. I mean, unless something dramatic happens between, and dramatic would need, I presume, some kind of impeachment process. But if at the end of 3 years of this kind of thing, if it continues along this way, and all the pressure is to step it up. I mean, they were offered, $1.5 billion package, but they insisted on having the $3.5 trillion package together. So they want to spend $5 trillion. A quarter of a quarter of the US's GDP, or is it more than that? Less than that. I'm not sure, but I mean, these are irrational numbers coming on top of what's already been spent in the US. But they show no sign of tamping down or throttling back. On the contrary, they want to press on and continue. And if that's what they're going to do for the next 3 years, well, then God help us.
Yeah, they've done 10 years of damage in 7 months. So
yeah, absolutely. There's a famous slogan from Brazil, in the 50s and 60s. The Brazilian government, also tried to do very much the same thing. It was a much smaller economy, obviously, than the US, no comparison. But, there's a famous story that they said they would achieve 20 years in 5, 20 years growth in 5. And the quit was they got 20 years inflation in 5 instead. And that seems to me exactly what the United States, the Biden-Harris administration is delivering for us. 20 years inflation in, 3.
Yeah. Mark Hewitt wants to know, would you pay $75,000 for a Hunter masterpiece?
No.
It depends what the Biden administration is offering for that $75,000. That's the reason you're paying the money for it.
Well, that's right. That's absolutely right. By the way, just to say again, there's a video on the topic of Hunter on our locals channel, which I did over the weekend, and in which I discussed some of the legal implications of some of the latest developments. If people want to find out about that, again, locals was the place to go and see it.
The Duran.locals.com. You'll find a link for that in the description box. And Sparky says that France's main power source and meltdown, Professor General 3 nuclear has operated safely for Gen 3 nuclear has operated safely for years. Also, meltdown proof Gen 4 uses nuclear waste for fuel.
I'm not a technical or I'm not a technical person. I'm not an industrial person. But I have to say, I find this fear there is of nuclear power really rather strange. This is my personal take of this. People, I think, are not very familiar with industrial processes, and they don't know that, when a technology is first developed, there are all kinds of accidents, and industrial accidents of any kind. I mean, there were, chemical oil spills, whatever, can be pretty awful, pretty devastating. Not, in my opinion, necessarily less. I don't see nuclear accidents as particularly more dangerous than other accidents that have happened. And well, what happens is gradually people, as they get to understand that technology, and there's the stage safety mechanisms built in, the technology becomes safe. Happened with aircraft, for example, and I think we've reached that point. In fact, I think we've reached that point some time ago with nuclear power, and the French, as absolutely correctly been said, run nuclear power stations for a long time. They're the key part of the French energy mix, and they've not had problems. And the reason they haven't had problems is because they've ironed out all the problems that previously were there. And it's strange to me that people don't understand that.
Yeah. Peekaboo says, with regards to Brazil, Alexander at the Duran, it was 50 years and 50 años en.
Well, there we go. I was talking
M5.
I was remembering it wrong.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Peekaboo, for that. Kurt says, please make a show on Denmark. I know it's a small country, but it's the EU's biggest energy provider, and they decided some months ago to end their own production.
Well, there you go. I wasn't aware
Putin
of that.
noted it as well, Alexander, that the EU is just, they're not producing. So, what do you want us to do?
I know.
They're not producing, but they have a problem with energy. Go figure. Mark Hewitt says, never mind Macron building mini reactors. Why has Boris Johnson not signed a contract with Rolls-Royce to build mini reactors? Maybe a cold winter will change Bojo's mind.
Well, it may do, but at the moment, Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, is very, very committed to winning over Green voters. This is very much his line. He sees that Green voters, he sees this way as attracting young people away from the Labour Party and the Green Party and winning them over to the Conservative Party. It's not working, by the way. I was just in the latest opinion polls, and yes, the Labour vote amongst young people has fallen. The Conservative vote has fallen even more, by the way, and they're all going to the Greens. So you can't compete with this. And it's a foolish policy. I can remember when Bojo was in favor of nuclear power, by the way.
Yeah, Zariel says that Nord Stream 2 is online today. Actually, they're ready to go.
They're ready to go. I think they filled it up, or at least they filled up one of the lines with gas. But I think they still need the stamp on the certificate for the tap to be reopened and the gas to come through. I predict it will happen, by the way, within a few weeks at most. I can't imagine that in the midst of an energy crisis, the Germans are going to leave Nord Stream 2 switched off. So that's my own personal view.
Yeah. Cromer from Locals says some Generation 4 plants use nuclear waste as fuel. And DGAR says from Locals, we have a live chat running in Locals as well, says that I've been following the protests, sick outs, Freedom Flew in protests to mandates. How effective do you think this will be? Salt of the earth workers fighting back.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first thing I would say is briefly about the reactors and the fact that they use fuel nuclear waste. This is absolutely true. I mean, technology of nuclear power has also advanced by leaps and bounds. It's very different technology from what it was in the 50s and 60s and 70s. So, people are out of date about this, about these things, these protests. And again, I have to be incredibly careful what I say now about these protests. The political effect of them cannot be overstated, in my opinion. I think they have a major effect on how things happen in Europe and elsewhere. Suffice to say that there were very tough lockdowns, as we all remember, in spring 2020, but no government in Europe has dared to repeat that to anything like the same degree or in that same sustained way ever since then. So, I think, and that's because the political reaction is so strong. What it has not yet translated to is people voting in sufficient numbers to change governments. Governments have shifted their position, but it's not yet led to any government being toppled.
It's probably the reverse, if I can be honest,
No.
Alexander's. A couple of things. The protests, I don't think, really have much effect if they're not sustained, if they're not continuous. I mean, if you just do like a one-off protest, just one weekend, then fine. People go out on the street and, the politicians just kind of say, okay, whatever, do your protests, and that's that. So it has to be sustained, number one. It has to have some sort of effect on society. I mean, you have to shut something down. You have to really cripple things for a long amount of time. Even the yellow vests, I think things really took effect with the yellow vests when, for example, the underground, the metro was affected and people couldn't travel via metro, via subway. That's when things really got hard for the government, for Macron. So unless you do something like that, it's not going to have much of an effect. And then you have places like Italy, Alexander, where you have someone like Draghi who, quite frankly, couldn't really care. I mean, he's not elected. He's not accountable to anybody. He doesn't have a constituency. He doesn't have a voter base. So what does he care what the Italians do? I mean, he really could not care. And finally, Alexander, another thing that you can comment on, when I say it's had the reverse effect, we did videos on Austria. We did videos on the Czech Republic and their votes. We have news coming out of Poland. We have news coming out of Hungary, where they have picked the person who is going to defeat, in their minds, is going to defeat Orban, the person that's going to be in charge of this coalition. From what I understand, we'll have to research everything out because we'll probably do a program on this. From what I understand, we're looking at a Merkel carbon copy.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I think that is absolutely correct. I think we are looking at a Merkel carbon copy. And of course, you're quite right in what you just said, in the sense that in Europe and across Europe, they're extremely effective, very, very skilled in controlling the political process. And protests that appear in particular countries have not so far cohered into a political force that is able to challenge the political system. And this is in contrast to the people in Brussels, who I've said before are extremely well organized and are able to maintain control and do so extremely well.
Yeah, for Hungary, it's the conservative mayor, Markizé, will be the prime minister candidate for the Hungarian United Opposition. I love the way they create this word propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, but we've seen this, story run all over the time. I mean, he is the mayor of, I believe he's the mayor of Budapest, isn't he? I think that's, I mean, he's been, if it is the same man, he's been talked about for a while. And of course, they put together all this Frankenstein's monster of an opposition, bringing together all sorts of major opposition parties. The objective always is to knock out the target, which is Orban. Once he's knocked out, well, you're left with a weak, disorganized government.
Perfect for the EU.
And that's perfect for the EU. And then they take steps to make sure that Orban and the political movement that he represented never get back. And they do that by, using the judicial system, starting investigations, doing all the sort of things, and also taking over the media, and then essentially blocking him out. That's the plan, and we're going to see it worked out. Now the question is whether Orban himself is going to be able to hold things together and to keep things together in the next few months in Hungary. But we did that program a short while ago in which we spoke about how they're picking off one leader at a time. They've gone for Kurz in Austria. They're now going for Poland. Hungary is next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if they pick off Orban, it's not looking good.
No, I agree. I
It's
agree.
not looking good at all. The EU will be happy.
Oh, they will be very happy. They will be very happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's shift to the UK, Alexander.
Yeah.
And I'm on Locals, which says Kwateng subsidizing fuel inflation with more printed money.
Well, indeed, yes. I mean, we've talked about Kwarteng a lot on our programs. He's doing exactly that. He's also doing it. He's also making all kinds of promises because from his point of view, what he wants eventually is to oust Sunak so that he's positioned to become prime minister. You have these political battles going on in Britain as well, but that's exactly what he's going to do.
And Flying Boar says Rishi Sunak and Kwateng, what are their views on Russia and Julian Assange?
I suspect exactly the same as everyone else in the British political system, if I can put it like that. I don't expect any change. I mean, let's say Johnson goes. Let's say Kwarteng wins against Sunak. Let's say Kwarteng becomes prime minister. British foreign policy will be exactly the same. It will be against Russia, hostile to Russia. Policies will continue exactly as they are. If there's an election and the Conservatives lose, which I don't expect, and when we end up with Prime Minister Keir Starmer, which I also don't expect, by the way, again, British foreign policy will be the same. If Nigel Farage were Prime Minister, or indeed if Jeremy Corbyn were Prime Minister, well, then things would change. But Nigel Farage made Brexit the only issue that he was really interested in pursuing. And Jeremy Corbyn, well, they destroyed him. So the establishment, the political class in Britain are united on certain policies. And that's the sort of policies that you've been talking about are exactly the kind of policies that they're united on. And no deviation from them is permitted.
Can I ask you a quick question going back? This is actually a news story for about like a week and a half ago for the Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah. They gave it to the Russian journalist. I forgot his name.
I didn't
kind of left me. Yeah, I never even. Yeah, how could they give it to him? I mean, maybe he does great work. I don't know, but how can they overlook Assange?
Well, there's no conceivable way that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee is going to award a Peace Prize to Julian Assange, because, of course, the United States is after him. Remember, Sweden and the Scandinavians played a major role in making sure that he stayed in prison all those years. There's no conceivable way they will do that. The connections, I'm sorry, this is going to sound a little conspiracist, but it's true. It's well established. The connections between the Nobel Peace Prize committees and the authorities in the West, in Washington, CIA, if you like, are very well established. And they're well established, and it's well known that they go back very far. Way back in the 50s, this wasn't the Peace Prize, but the Literature Prize. It was the CIA that made arrangements for it to go to Boris Pasternak for Dr. Zhivago, which was seen very much to Pasternak's own embarrassment, by the way, as an anti-Soviet novel. And the CIA actually had the thing translated quickly, and they sent it off to Oslo or Stockholm or whatever it was, so that it would just get railroaded through incredibly fast. This is a political institution. It always has been. The scientific prizes are a little less affected by political bias, but even there's a certain amount. But the Peace Prize has always been that, and it's been that for a very, very long time. There is no way a political dissident in the West would ever receive it.
Right. All right. Jersey and Monica said about Budapest mayor has already resigned, and the Hungarian opposition changed its candidate from the mayor of Budapest to another mayor. Okay.
Well, there we go. Lots of stories. I mean, it's going to be very difficult to change the picture. Hungary is a difficult nut to crack because, first of all, Orban is an extremely skilled politician, very clever man. That's one thing. But beyond that, he's also got enormous goodwill behind him, because he took over a Hungary which was a complete mess, and he turned it round. And of course, there's lots of people in Hungary who remember that. So yes, he has his fierce opponents, but he has his supporters too.
Yeah. All right. Pence Chen sends us €5 super sticker. Thank you very much, Pence Chen, and a super chat that says thanks for your hard work. And Douglas says Panama, Paradise, and Pandora Papers. Who is targeting the City of London?
I don't think anybody's targeting the City of London. What some people are trying to do is to target some people around the world, principally Vladimir Putin, who they think is exposed to embarrassment on these questions. Way back when the Panama Papers were published, there was actually an article which I read, I think it was in Time magazine, by a man called Gad. I can't remember his full name, but he was clearly very well informed. And he actually said that there'd been a meeting the year before in which there'd been a discussion about how they could embarrass Putin in response to Russian misinformation exercises. And the way to do that was by raising the profile of his alleged corruption. So I actually read that in Time magazine. It was quite openly said there. And I think that's what they've been doing. And they've been going around, rooting around all these various, first a law firm in Panama, then, as I said, various consultancy groups in London. Now, the reason London has been particularly affected by the Pandora revelations is because, of course, as everybody knows, London is the world capital of the offshore industry. We did a program again with Robert Barnes, which you can see on Locals, in which part of that program was about specifically this issue. Remember, he's a tax lawyer, so this is something he knows incredibly well about. But the British run all the various tax havens around the world, in the Channel Islands, the Caribbean, you name it, they basically run them. And if you really want to root around and find information to embarrass people like Putin or whomever, well, you have to go through London, because this is where everything joins up. I'm going to say that's embarrassing for the British, obviously, but their ideological and visceral hostility to Putin and Russia is so strong that I suspect they're going along with it to a great degree, because they want to find it. Now, along the way, all sorts of other people get damaged. Collateral damage is done, and it's interesting to see who they tend to be. They always and invariably seem to be people that the US authorities have a beef with. So the Prime Minister
Czech
of the
Republic.
Czech Republic, the President of Azerbaijan, they've come in for some rather embarrassing revelations at particular junctures. But I've no doubt that this is an American-run thing.
Yeah. I mean, does it really damage the City of London as well? I mean, do people really say, you know what, I'm not going to put my money, I'm not going to work with the City of London because of the risk that maybe I get exposed? It doesn't really damage the business side of things.
No, I mean, the amount of revelations that take place is tiny, and it only really affects politically connected people. So, I mean, the vast majority of people who put their money offshore via the various institutions and agencies with which the City of London proliferates, they're just not affected by this. They're not concerned by it. It doesn't affect them in the slightest.
Yeah. Mark Hewitt wants to know, will you sign up for the Saki School of Economics, which includes the belief that inflation is good? Oh, no, they really are. They're really working this inflation good line. I mean, I wonder if it's working on people. I wonder if are actually people that buy inflation is good.
Oh, absolutely, there are. Undoubtedly, there are. And by the way, they've always been there. There's always been a sort of community of people on the left, and this is very much a left-wing thing, which regards inflation as good. The idea, I've never really understood the thinking behind it, but they've always seen, the depreciation in money as somehow a good thing economically. Supposedly, it leads to higher growth. I mean, none of these claims do I buy, but there are people who believe that. But think also how we've gone from inflation is transitory; it'll only be here for a little while, to inflation is good. I mean, this is a sign, as I said, that now that they're talking to us about what a good thing inflation is. What they mean is that inflation isn't going to be transitory. I suspect that part of the thinking about inflation is good is that inflation does have one effect, which is that it reduces the value or price of debts. So some debts,
some
some
inflation,
debts, some exactly. So I mean, I think that's probably the thinking that, you know, if you owe $100,000, you owe the bank $100,000, and inflation is at 10%. Well, that you know reduces by 10%, but you know every so. But as I said, I mean, in practice, there are so many other things that even that isn't really true. But I know there are people who think like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the chat, Alexander. Yeah, like a 1% or a little bit of inflation.
Yeah.
Okay, absolutely.
Well, bear in mind,
deflation is terrible. I'm looking here from Rampart.
yeah,
Says deflation is terrible.
absolutely, because that does make debts much heavier. But you know, do bear in mind that you know, in the time before we had inflation at 2%. I mean, you know, there's always been a certain amount of inflation in the industrialized system, in the economic system. So we've never had a situation, a prolonged period, any time since the Second World War, of zero inflation, of, you know, sustained zero inflation. There's always been some, but you know, there's a big difference between some and a lot, and we're now getting an awful lot.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's see. Boris says corporations buy their own stocks. Capitalism is dead.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think the idea of corporations buying their own stocks, at least the way it's done and the reasons it's done and how it's done, and I mean, basically goosing up also their price, the price of their stocks. I mean, it has no real connection to the business world that I used to remember. And of course, you know, but now it happens. It's now a standard practice.
Yeah. Cromer says the only thing transitory in Washington's line is Washington's line on any issue. Very well said. And Yugoslav says dollar-denominated debts, so all U.S. sovereign debt. Deflation is good. You enjoy deflation due to tech advancement. It's only bad if you organize your economy around debt. That's not the only way. Those are two messages from Yugoslav.
Yeah, I understand that, and I do understand that there is also a view. I mean, you know, deflation, by the way, was typical of the 19th century economy. Because I mean, partly because it was connected to gold. Prices tended to fall because production and productivity rose, and that caused prices to fall. But that was, in some ways, a very early industrial economy. It wasn't an economy where consumption played the huge role that it does today. And the problem with a deflationary economy is that it does actually put people off from buying today, because they say, you know, if I leave my money in the bank, that money will grow in value, prices will fall, so I can put off my buying until tomorrow. And that does overall reduce the velocity of money, which perhaps in the economic system that we have now is not an entirely good thing.
Yeah. Let's see here. Heyman says, at least we can still hear Alexander. Actually, Alexander, you cleared up for a bit. You are clearing up slowly, which is good. Thank you very much, Heyman, for that. And Heyman says, how would you rate Brexit? Weakens the EU, but the UK suffers?
No, I think that it certainly weakens the EU. The UK could do, I think, very well out of it. Problem is that Johnson was very skilled at navigating a path out. But as we've seen, he's a poor manager and he doesn't really know how to work it. And he doesn't really, I think, understand very well how to work it. And he goes from one thing to the next without really working it through. What it needs is a prime minister who works 15 hours a day. It needs a Clement Attlee or a Margaret Thatcher. Prime ministers who did that sort of thing, who are committed to the project, who have that kind of drive and attention to detail, and can put all the pieces together and bring it together. You have that kind of a person, you can make it work. you could set up a good macroeconomic environment in Britain, and Britain could do very well from Brexit. But at the moment, not happening.
Wow. Someone in the live stream says Colin Powell has passed away. And I'm
wow.
doing a search. New York Times says yes. Colin Powell, former U.S. Secretary of State, dies of, well, it says here, complications. That's what the New York Times has as their title. Secretary of State under Bush, George W. Yeah.
Indeed. Well,
so Alexander, any thoughts on the legacy of Colin Powell? Then that's one of the.
I do. Yes, I mean,
messages.
It's
84 years old.
Awkward to speak about somebody who's just died because, of course, there's always the sense of a personal tragedy, and one doesn't want to say things that could be hurtful. I'm only going to say this. I think that he was a person with real abilities and who found himself in a very, very important position. I don't think he used those abilities well. I think in the end, he was a major disappointment at multiple levels. And I'm talking about him politically. I know nothing about him as a human being, but this isn't something I really want to talk about much today. A man has just died. His family, obviously, they're experiencing the tragedy.
Like 20 minutes ago,
20 minutes ago. So I mean, we can do a proper assessment of him later, after some time. Yeah.
So, wow. Okay, so that's big news there. Rich says Italy's familial culture is quite hated by the Western world. They don't like young Italians living with their families, quite like in Russia and China.
Well, probably, though I would point out that the average age that a young Briton now leaves his or her family is 25. That may come as a surprise to people, but I mean, it's been rising steadily. So we are not perhaps quite at the situation in the West where Italy is quite so different. And that's partly, I think, because of the economic situation. It's become much more difficult today to go out and to set up oneself, get a good job, get yourself a home, have a family in the way that you do. But certainly Italy is a very family-oriented society, or at least it has been. I'm told that that's become less true today. And, some people do not like families. I mean, I remember confronting this when I was at university and being quite shocked about this. And people talking about family as being an oppressive, patriarchal thing. And of course, Italy, with its very family-based society, very family-based economy. Many Italian businesses are family-based. That, of course, is very out of tune with the zeitgeist.
Yeah. Ian says, Alexander, your video on Russia and China hypersonic glide missiles was very interesting. Bad for the USA and the Western world.
I agree. I think so too. I mean, as I said, the Chinese are teasing, as I said, everybody. They're saying that this is all this is all done to show it's for civilian space uses. We don't need to take any of that especially seriously. And there's another video coming, by the way, on this topic soon, which it deals with the Chinese reaction, and a very, very interesting editorial that they've just published, which sets out what their basic demands are.
Real serious stuff going on that just doesn't get reported, Alexander. Let's touch upon. Okay, you've got another video on the hypersonic story, the hypersonic missiles, but let's touch real quickly while we have some time. How are you feeling? Everything good?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's talk about NATO. Flying Boar says, breaking news, Russia to suspend diplomatic ties with NATO. Flying Boar, thank you for that. I want to get into the NATO story a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think we should.
It. What does this mean? What does this mean between Russia and NATO breaking ties? Does it really mean something, or is it purely iconic on the surface?
No, it's not iconic. It's not on the surface. It does mean an awful lot. As I said, the Russian position has been hardening ever since last year. I mean, I think the point was finally reached. Oddly enough, I think it was partly connected to the Navalny affair. I think the Russians were so infuriated by the idiocy of the Navalny affair that they decided at that point that they're dealing with a bunch of imbeciles, and that there really isn't any point any longer in trying to talk rationally to them. So what has happened is right through 2021, we've seen a steady hardening on the Russian position on multiple fronts. So we had that affair in April when Zelensky moved the Ukrainian troops to the contact line, and the Russians countered by this big build-up. And they said, if there's a war, it'll be the end of Ukraine. Then there were the negotiations between Putin and Biden, which didn't apparently go terribly well in Geneva, in which the Russians apparently gave no ground. And over the last couple of days, we've seen a whole succession of ever stronger statements from the Russians, as I said, on questions like Ukraine, on questions of Ukraine's membership of NATO.
Nuland in Moscow.
Nuland in Moscow, which was a complete debacle. I mean, she wasn't able to make any progress. She found the Russians unyielding on every issue. And now the West, NATO expelled those 8 Russian diplomats. The Russians showed with the Czech affair a few months ago that they don't take this line down anymore. If the West expels their diplomats, they will expel diplomats in return, Western diplomats in return. And they've now taken the further step of closing down completely all contacts with NATO. Now, there is a particular aspect of this which is connected to the Nuland affair, because back in 2016, Obama massively scaled down the Russian diplomatic presence in the US and seized Russian diplomatic property, which the Russians say is against international law. By the way, they're right, but we won't go into that.
You're talking about Seattle, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They're absolutely right. I mean, there are rules about that. Anyway, so the Russians have bitterly complained about this. They've also expelled large numbers of American diplomats. They put the US embassy in Moscow under severe pressure. There's been all sorts of talk from all the usual suspects, Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, all those people, about expelling Russian diplomats in retaliation. The Russians told Nuland, look, if this situation continues, unless you reverse policy, unless you start easing off on these questions of diplomatic representation, we are prepared to go all the way. We are prepared to get to the point where there are no diplomats from Russia in your country and no US diplomats in our country. And by the action they've just taken with NATO, they've once again underlined the importance of that, and and the fact that they're deadly serious about it. And they've also said to Nuland that if you want to improve relations with us, this business of diplomatic representation for us is a litmus test. Either you move on it, or relations will continue to go from bad to worse. So again, through the action they've taken today, they're underlining that position. So they're taking a very hard line on every issue.
Yeah, well spoken from a crystal clear oracle now. Alexander, they don't want any rapprochement with Russia. Why would they send Nuland if they wanted a rapprochement with Russia? I don't think this is any coincidence that all of this is happening on the back of Nuland's visit to Moscow. Obviously, it did not go well. If it went well, you wouldn't have had this this turn of events. Is this a plan B, C, D for the United States, for the Western globalists, the Western elite? If everything that they're doing right now doesn't go well, if things continue to deteriorate, not only in the EU, but more specifically in the United States, if things really start to get very, very bad with everything happening in the United States on a domestic level, whether you're looking at the mandates or inflation or the southern border, all of it, is this a plan B or C or D to say, you know what, we'll start something with Russia, and of course we will use Ukraine. Let's do this NATO. Once again, let's get this this row with Russia and NATO moving so that we can prepare the way.
I think there's some elements of this. I mean, specifically on Nuland, I've come actually around to the view that the reason Nuland went to Moscow is because the neocons wanted to make sure that whoever did go to Moscow did not take any step in improving relations. There is clearly some kind of a debate going on within the wider US government about whether, the United States needs to sort of patch up things with the Russians a bit so that the US can focus on China instead. And of course, the neocons are utterly opposed to that sort of thing. Nuland, who is a neocon herself, is utterly opposed to that sort of thing. So they sent her to Moscow to make absolutely sure that there was no improvement in relations. I think that was what the agenda of this visit was really all about. But beyond that, if your mindset is a neocon one, and it's difficult, obviously, to think like these people do because they think in a very strange and ideological way that isn't one that's very accessible to many of us. But if you think in the way that they do, I mean, you look around the world, you see things, they're not going according to plan. You see the Russians, the Chinese are getting closer. You see the Middle East is going the wrong way. You see Afghanistan has fallen. You see all sorts of things. And I saw, by the way, Alex, you did a good question and answer and things on locals about John Bolton's latest interview. So I think what these people do in this situation is, as they see things going wrong, and remember, they're committed to their program because they're ideologues. You go for broke. You actually try and intensify problems. You try to make them worse because you sense that your advantage is slipping from you, and you want to use that advantage that you still have to the maximum degree possible in order to break your opponents and to somehow crash through. And I think that's probably what the thinking is amongst them at the moment. They can't make agreements with Russia. They can't make agreements with China. They can't compromise on the Middle East either. So they're trying to break the logjam by smashing everything up. And I think that is essentially a philosophy of chaos. The idea that if you create a massive amount of chaos, the US, with its greater power, these people still are very convinced the United States has the greater power, and its manifest destiny will somehow win through and be able to reorder the world as it wants to. So I think there is an element of that. And again, if you go to the websites of these weird and wonderful neocon outfits, that there are lots of these websites, by the way, you find people talking like that. I mean, there are people who talk in this very strange way and think in this kind of strange way. Very odd to see Americans talking like this. I mean, this isn't something I associate much with the United States, but you do find this kind of attitude there.
Look, Lavrov made the statement with Ukraine, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Medvedev did this big article. Lavrov who said that if there's a war, Ukraine will be destroyed.
Okay, so you have Medvedev, you have Lavrov. I mean, the neocons, the US, the Biden White House, they've got in their warning. Yeah. I think Russia believes, at least there are parts of the Kremlin that do believe, that the US government right now, the Biden White House, is so incompetent, so delusional, so disorganized and fragmented that they may actually revisit their plan in April. And like you said, this time go for broke once again in Ukraine.
Yes.
I consider the message from Medvedev and from Lavrov kind of saying, you know what? Don't even think about it. If this is your plan B or C, don't even think about don't think about doing anything in and around Ukraine or even Belarus, I imagine as well, because if you do, it's you're going to get your clocks cleaned. Period.
Well, exactly. I think that's exactly what they're saying. They are taking the hardest, as I said, the hardest possible line, and I think that's exactly what's going on.
And with NATO, what do you think is going to happen?
And with NATO, I mean, it seems incredible today, but back in the 90s, the Russians were even asking to join NATO. It seems very strange to think that. And initially, of course, Putin wanted to maintain this close dialogue with NATO, but now, they've decided there's simply no point in talking to NATO anymore because, as far as they're concerned, NATO is straightforwardly hostile to them. So what is there to talk about?
It's over, Alexander. It is now a multipolar world, a bipolar world. That's it. It is done. It's completely over. I saw an article, and we'll touch on this real quickly. We'll wrap things up. I saw an article talking about what's going on in Ethiopia and how China, Russia, and Turkey are working to move into the space in Ethiopia that's been left by the US. I mean, we'll probably do a video on this because it's a lot more intricate than what I'm saying. But once again, you're seeing a whole different world forming. Yes. And I'm starting to believe that even Turkey is, God, I would have never have said this a year ago, but I think Turkey may be 50-50 now. And with what's happened with NATO, Turkey could be saying China and Russia just look like a better option at this point.
Well, indeed. I mean, can I just say something? With respect to Turkey, I not only said it wouldn't happen, I said the opposite. I mean, I went out of my way to make it absolutely clear that I thought that for all Erdogan's antics, ultimately he would remain very much connected to the alliance with the US, to NATO and all the rest. And I am absolutely sure that was his intention. But he has seen what Western policy does. He's seen its inconsistencies, its inability to cohere. And I think he also senses that the balance of power in the world is shifting, as lots of people are. Look at the Saudis, perhaps even more interesting bellwether in some ways, that the Saudis are now edging away from the US and they're talking with the Russians. I mean, for most of my adult life, the relations between Russia and Saudi Arabia were just terrible. I mean, the two were the most deadly enemies. And now suddenly the Saudis are actually prepared to work more closely with the Russians than they are with the United States. And that's such a radical revolution. And you're talking about Ethiopia and about the Chinese, the Russians, the Turks getting involved there. Again, only 10 years ago, it would have been the United States which would have been involved in trying to broker a compromise. Where is the United States over Ethiopia and Egypt and all the problems there? What is it doing? It's nowhere to be seen. It's invisible because, of course, the administration doesn't have a policy. And if it did have a policy, it wouldn't execute it, and it wouldn't be a realistic policy anyway. And they would come along and they would talk to all the various players in this region, and those players would go away and they would say to themselves, the Americans just don't know what they're saying. They're so disconnected from any degree of reality that we aren't here to waste our time with them anymore. So that is the reality. I mean, China, Russia, Turkey, other powers are building, they're moving, they're making their moves, they're making their decisions, they're sorting themselves out. And it is, as you correctly said, it's a world of bipolarity. Unipolarity has gone.
Yeah. Raphael says, guys, Russia is now a national language in Ukraine. Ukraine is moving past the USA and NATO. Rest of the world sees us as crazy people. The end.
Well, Russian is not a national language in Ukraine. Russian is widely spoken in Ukraine. In fact, most Ukrainians speak Russian in their everyday lives, but the Ukrainian government at the moment is trying to do everything it can to prevent them using Russian. And of course, it's not taught in schools anymore, and it doesn't appear on Ukrainian television or on radio or in newspapers or in all sorts of things. So it's not a national language in Ukraine. But that, of course, is creating enormous tensions within Ukraine itself, because many, many people who prefer to speak Russian are very resentful and angry about it. So it's a major thing. But Ukraine also is facing multiple other problems because, of course, they have had a weak economy, a dysfunctional government, massive corruption, and, of course, from a point of view of a Ukrainian consumer, high energy prices, high food prices, which is what we're getting, are a disaster. And if people wonder why the political situation in Ukraine is heating up, it's partly because the political system, dysfunctional as it is becoming increasingly nervous about the fact that the Ukrainian economy is heading downward very fast. And if Nord Stream 2 does come on stream within the next few weeks, as I fully predict it will, it's game over.
Game over, yeah. Raul Pinto says, Financial Times, China's economy grew by 4.9% in the third quarter as post-pandemic momentum slows. Any thoughts on how it could impact the world economy? That's the other side of the coin. Things are going absolutely as bad as they can go for the West and for the U.S. under Biden, but China is slowing down.
Absolutely. And it's facing major problems. I mean, it did exactly the same thing as Western countries did. It rushed to try and impose restrictions on coal because it was also going to buy into the climate agenda. And of course, it's now facing all kinds of problems. It's run out of coal. It's facing energy outages, energy shortages. It's affected by the worldwide inflation too. It's affected by the supply chain problems. It's got longer running demographic problems. It's got all sorts of problems, many of which have built up for a long time. And of course, as we've discussed in previous programs, it's got an over-indebted and bloated property sector, which it is trying to deflate. Now, I'm going to say this, and this is a point which I made many times. It's always a mistake to try to keep your economy running at astronomically high levels indefinitely. This is the mistake the Democrats have made in the United States. They wanted 8% GDP growth this year. So this is what the whole point of throwing all that money at the economy was supposed to be about. It was supposed to make the economy run faster, and all that's done is it's triggered inflation. China has been doing something rather like that for some time. It's been trying to keep very high GDP growth rate figures. It's wanted to keep growth at 6 to 8%, whereas realistically, a 4 to 5% growth rate, given the maturity of the economy, would have been more realistic. And what that's done is it's inflated a property market bubble, which has now become a problem for the overall economy, and which they're now trying to deflate. And that means lower growth. And that is inevitable. But it means that lower growth from China, lower industrial growth from China, is going to do two things. Firstly, it may take some of the heat off inflation in some respects, in the sense that lower growth in China will mean, hopefully, lower energy costs, because China is this huge consumer of energy, imports oil and gas from around the world. If it's not growing at 8%, it's growing at 4 to 5%. One assumes it will need less of that. But it also means higher prices in other respects, because one of the reasons why inflation has been relatively low in the Western world over the last 15 or so years is because despite all the massive amount of money printing that's been going on, most of the money that's been printed has ended up in China because it's been used to buy Chinese goods. If China's producing fewer of them, or perhaps not so much fewer of them, is consuming more of them, and the Chinese economy isn't growing fast enough to go on producing goods at that rate, then we could start to see all sorts of goods that China produces and which we rely on China to produce, like computers, cars, well, car components, everything you can imagine. Though that will start, those prices may start to grow, at which point inflation might become more entrenched. Now, which of these two is the greater factor? I think overall, a slowing Chinese economy gives upward shift to inflation more than it creates a downward shift. So that's my own view. We'll see whether I'm right. If I'm right, then it was an even greater mistake by the Democrats to start pumping the US with money at this particular point in time.
Chinese know this.
Well, the Chinese knows. Can I just make it's very interesting to see that these two big economies, they're going, the economic planners, the economic decision makers are going the absolute opposite way. The Chinese are retrenching. They're trying to deflate their property bubble. The Democrats are in effect prime pumping.
Inflating.
They're inflating. I mean, it's that this is going to create an even bigger imbalance. And in the short term, when this thing plays out next year, we're going to see an even bigger US trade deficit. Because, I mean, it's going to, in the short term, Chinese lower growth will, this is the short term, lower growth will translate into less Chinese buying of goods. Where will those goods go? They will go to the United States, where, of course, because of the printing machine, there is ample demand for them. So we're going to see the deficits soar, and of course, the trade is already at record levels.
And politically, there is no way that the Democrats are going to pull back.
No, I agree.
No way. Things are just going to go from bad to worse. And China knows this.
I agree.
They've boxed themselves in, the Democrats in the Biden White House. They've boxed themselves in.
I agree. I completely agree.
Wow. All right. Nitsewich says, we see China and Russia making leaps and bounds technologically while getting rid of corruption. How's it looking in America corruption-wise? Guess.
Well, I mean, I think corruption has now become very widespread in the United States in a way that was not the case before. Again, I'm going to be a little careful what I say, but it seems to me that corruption now has become completely embedded in parts of the economic and political system. And I'm afraid it's affected the way elections are conducted too. So all I'm going to say there.
And corruption in the EU as well has become embedded now. It's not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Let's see. Raphael says, so Putin said openly, China will not have to use force to conquer Taiwan. 2 days later, a missile that can go around the globe. Wow. Explain.
Well, because Putin's long-term reasoning, mind you, the Russians do make the mistake sometimes of assuming their opponents are more rational than they are. But Putin's long-term reasoning is that China is growing so strong in military terms that the United States is going to give up any idea of defending Taiwan. So there won't need to be a war over Taiwan because the Chinese will simply be able to absorb it because the United States won't risk a war by resisting them. I am not as sanguine about this as Putin is. I get to say that straight away. Also, I think that Putin perhaps is not sufficiently well informed on Chinese thinking. My own sense is that the Chinese themselves have been working themselves up to a pitch on Taiwan over the last few months. And I think that they're closer to a decision to go to war over Taiwan than Putin himself realizes. It may be that Putin's words also, by the way, were intended to calm some of this.
Calm them down.
Calm the Chinese down. It'd be very typical of the way the Russians think. As I've said before, as I said in a program we did quite recently, the Russians, they can be pretty forceful when they need to be, but generally they are people who prefer things to be done in a measured way, and I think that may be part of the purpose of what he said.
Heyman says that Russia is helping make China too costly to confront. The U.S. may return to a more profitable relationship with China, at which point leaves Russia out again.
Well, watch my next video, which is going to appear both on both on Locals and on my YouTube channel, because I discussed that. There's been a very interesting article which the Chinese have published, Global Times, the Chinese government's mouthpiece, in which they're basically offering the US a deal. One which, by the way, confirms, as far as I'm concerned, that this was indeed a hypersonic glide missile test, but never mind. But follow it. The Chinese are ready for a deal. So, by the way, are the Russians. I mean, they're not out to conquer the world, raise the red flag over, London or Washington or anything of that kind. At this moment in time, both the Chinese and the Russians have too many problems, to say it straightforwardly, to want to take over the world. So they want a deal. They want what the Chinese are referring to as a stalemate. They've even at one point actually called it a ceasefire with the Americans. As an interesting choice of words. And the Russians are signaling that they would be open to the same thing. But the political challenges in doing that are enormous. And I come back to the point of Nuland's visit. She went to Moscow to make sure it didn't happen. That was what I think that visit was all about.
Politically, they will never allow it to happen. We've been saying this for so many years that the U.S. and Russia, they should be getting along. They're natural allies. China, the U.S., they'll patch up their disputes. Politically, at this point in time, can't happen.
No,
they will not let it happen. The forces in DC will not let it happen.
No, I agree with that. I mean, we went from the divorce. Remember, a couple of years ago, Alex and I were talking about divorce between the US and China, and that was clearly, in my opinion, what Donald Trump was all about. He saw the Chinese had gained massive advantages in the economic and trade relationship. He wanted to rebalance it. We've gone from that to outright geopolitical confrontation. And we've gone with the Russians from a situation in the early 2000s when there were certain tensions, but overall there was some kind of dialogue and now again, the neocons have driven us into a situation where it's become all out confrontation. And that's what the neocons do. I mean, you don't have to like the Chinese. You don't have to like the Russians. But if you ignore the fact that these are powerful countries with interests they will defend, then you are going to find yourself in a confrontation with them. And if you don't think it through, it could be one to your disadvantage. And that's what the neocons, with their ideological mindset, have achieved.
Yeah. English loyalist says the hypersonic missile for me is a sign that power has really shifted from the US. The US's response is we have gender studies and diversity.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that. I mean, that's the other problem, because, of course, the neocons are obsessed, obviously, with foreign policy and are causing all the damage there. And the rest of the political class is absorbed with other things. And they are, shall I say it, irrelevant things.
Yeah.
I mean, they might even be damaging things. But ultimately, in terms of power balances, I mean, it's not going to shape the world. You know, what goes on in Denver. I mean, you know, what sort of thing? Well, it might actually. I mean, it might cause all kinds of problems. But I mean, it's just that there is so massive a mismatch between, you know, reality-based politics now and these weird politics that we're seeing, that it's very difficult to understand. Firstly, how we got here, and secondly, how we get out of it.
Yeah, I agree. Heyman says it's like three stubborn guys in a sauna. Well said, Heyman. And Mark Hewitt says California version of the UK's IR35. AB5 is causing problems at the California ports. Small HGV owner drivers are not allowed into the ports because of AB5. Stupidity exists all around the world.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this is so true.
Yeah,
at every level.
At every level.
I mean, if you want to see somebody who's absolutely had it up to there, just go to Putin's latest interviews and comments on energy policy in Europe. I think he's just tearing out. I've never known him so angry as he was in one of the comments that he made at one of these sort of meetings that he had. He just let rip into them. I mean, he sees a world in the West led by imbeciles, and he's right.
And he's right, yeah. Where are we here? Command unit says, with operations in Belarus and Russia failing, with the next operation being Central Asia.
Well, they tried. They tried very hard in the mid 2000s. Didn't work out then. But, you know, the neocons are people who never give up. And I mean, that's not something they know how to do. So quite possibly, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think they're very much entrenched in Ukraine, and that's going to be there. They just can't get it out of their head. They're stuck there.
I agree. I think, as you correctly said, I mean, I think Ukraine is, for one thing, I think that they're quite as interested in Central Asia. Ukraine is something they're fixated on.
Yeah, I agree with that. Rocky Lux on Local says, what is the game plan with northern Kosovo? It looks to me like a set move to enforce authority over the Christian majority in the north and control over the Trepka mining complex in the same area.
Well, I think you've discussed it, and of course, there's also now talk about Greater Albania and all of these things. But no, absolutely, it's also partly in order to destabilize Serbia itself. The
Mhm.
idea is, you crush the Serbs in those Serbs that are left in Kosovo. You drive them out of Kosovo, push them into Serbia itself. That will create another political crisis in Serbia, and that will bring down the present government of Serbia and replace it with a pro-European government, just as happened before when the same tactics were used to bring down Slobodan Milosevic. So, there may be some element of that too. Hasn't quite worked this time so far, partly because Serbia can rely on Russia in a way that it couldn't previously. But, again, they don't give up.
They don't give up. And Leafy Bug says about someone who doesn't give up. Apparently, Merkel is planning to retire in Italy when she quits her current position. Is there any significance in this relocation? I wonder if she's going to lead some kind of attempt to restructure the EU in order to rebalance what is obviously an unsustainable structure, something less punitive to Southern Europe, hence the
I don't know.
Italian base.
Well, I don't think Merkel has any intention of really retiring. I should say that straight away. I think the reason, if she does go to Italy, it's because the Italians and the French, for all kinds of reasons, are in control of certain, or at least nominate certain people to particular EU institutions. And I suspect that what she wants to do, if she's going to go to Italy, is try to get the Italians and the French to agree to her appointment as president of the European Council. I think that's the objective. I think that's where she's heading.
That's her goal. Yeah, I agree with that. Let's see. Shady Lady, 299, super sticker. Thank you very much. And Raphael says, Foreman said he knew he lost the fight against Ali in the 7th round. Ali asked him, is that all you have? Russia and China have already asked us that too.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good bringing up Foreman and Ali.
I remember. I so remember that fight, by the way. Yeah.
Awesome.
Is
Super chat. Thank you.
That's the rumble in the jungle. I seem to remember. Is it all?
Foreman and Ali. Yeah, I think it is. Raphael, is that the rumble in the jungle? I think it is.
Jungle. Yeah, in Zaire as it was. Yeah. Quite a good film about it. Very difficult to find, by the way.
Yeah. Rich says China has deployed a fully in-house developed hypersonic glide vehicle named DDZF on its warships for some time.
Yes, I know. I'm well aware of that. And that, by the way, is an important game changer in itself because, as I understand, it's warships, but it's land-based, but it's intended as an anti-ship weapon. And the Chinese have displayed it in military parades, and either they've upgraded that technology to make it into this much more advanced vehicle, or they've been able to take technology. I wouldn't be surprised, because materials technology is an area where the Russians are very advanced, and there might have been some degree of technology sharing there. But regardless, they have hypersonic weapons already, which they can use against the US surface fleet. And that's going to make enormous problems for the US surface fleet. And now they're supplementing that with this ability to carry out hypersonic missile strikes on the continental United States. So it's a game changer.
All right, let's wrap it up then. We have one more super chat here from A. Sanchez, which is a good way to wrap up the show, Alexander. Is there any end in sight for the incompetent leadership of the West?
No,
they get promoted up.
Absolutely,
Sanchez,
absolutely. I mean, incompetence now is a necessary. It's necessary in order to become leader of the West.
Exactly.
A leader in the West.
The more incompetent, the higher you're going to rise.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so, the short answer is no. Look at our president. Look at the president of the United States at the moment. He takes incompetence to a level which I must admit I would never have believed.
The EU is perfect for incompetence. Incompetence promotions, I guess, is what we could call it. Flying Boar says, "What is austerity and how does it work?" That's a big topic,
Oh, it's a huge
especially from
topic.
Greeks. We know austerity very well.
We
That's
know
for sure.
what is austerity? Transfer of money from those who produce to those who don't, basically, and who are concentrated on certain institutions. Transfer of money from us to the oligarchs, recycling it through the banking system, and at the same time, a massive squeeze on people's wages, incomes, and livelihoods. And we've seen that in Greece,
Demoralization as well.
demoralization of society and weakening of society altogether.
Yeah. Notice with all of the stuff that happened in Europe, and we'll leave it on this note, Alexander, with all of the protests happening in Europe the other day on October the 15th, just about every country was having some sort of protest. Greeks were dead silent. You know why? They've been completely demoralized since austerity hit them for God knows how many years, 10 years of austerity. The Greeks just don't have it in them anymore.
They've been crushed. And of course, if you knew, I mean, Greece was the place where protests were almost routine. I mean,
Exactly.
I mean, it was. I mean, it was part. I mean, it was part of the life of the country. I mean,
we were some of the best protesters. We were some of the best protesters, but that's been completely just crushed. Yeah. Flying Boar says austerity didn't work in Greece. How's it supposed to work in Ukraine? Well, it didn't work for the people. It didn't make the country better, but Alexander, it made a lot of people very, very rich, which is exactly what it did in Ukraine and what it's doing in Ukraine.
Absolutely. And of course, it also ultimately reinforced, one has to say this, it reinforced the EU system. I mean, it meant that countries, that might have wanted to rethink membership of the euro, for example, or if not membership of the euro, branch out in different policies. Well, they saw what happened to Greece, and they're terrified of having that example, being subjected to the same example. So I wouldn't say that it failed. I mean, I think in some ways it did exactly what it was intended to do. I mean, it crushed Greece, completely. So it's now totally under the heel. Now, of course, Greece is a small place. It can't compare to somewhere like Italy, or Britain, or
look at the result in Italy.
But having said that, as I said, exactly. I mean, I wouldn't say that it failed. It made most people very much poorer. I mean, it's hollowed out the country. I mean, I haven't been there obviously for a while now because of the travel restrictions and all the rest. But what I hear about it is that it's a very sad place now.
Yeah, well, we'll leave it on this note, Alexander. In Italy, what did the austerity lead to? It led to Draghi.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly what the EU wanted.
Exactly.
It couldn't have ended better for the EU as far as Italy's concerned.
No.
And they pushed Salvini to the side.
Yeah. Exactly so.
So,
exactly so.
Austerity definitely works for some people.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
For the UK, well, the UK voted to get out.
Yes, I know.
And it took them 6 years to finally get everything sealed up. But God, did it take a long time.
It took a very long time. It was an enormous battle. They got there in the end, but it's been very hard.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts, Alexander, as we wrap it up? Thank you to our moderators, to everyone that joined us on this live stream, and to everyone on locals at duran.locals.com. Yes, Alexander, let's wrap it up. Your final thoughts.
Final thoughts. I mean, definitely unipolarity's ended. Definitely we are in the geopolitical blocks, the new geopolitical blocks have emerged. The pivotal country, as always, is the United States. That's where the major decisions are going to be made. And never has the leadership of the United States been so weak since the foundation of the Republic. But it's the Americans who have to make the big decisions, which will determine their own future and much of the world.
But time is running out.
Time is running out.
Time is running out.
Exactly. I mean, the danger, as I said, I think there is a danger of war. I mean, that's a real danger with people like the neocons. I mean, it's real. And there's a real danger of a political crisis in the US. I mean, some of the things I've been reading that some of the people who are afraid of the orange man are writing are just, I mean, to my mind, people who are writing them have lost their reason. even if there's some element of calculation behind it. But the real danger, there is a danger of a war, but I think the greater danger actually is a systems collapse in Europe, and inconceivable that would have seemed to me once in the US too.
That's what worries me.
Yeah.
I think you spelled it out right there. I worry that there's going to be a system collapse, which will push them to start a war in order to cover up the system collapse.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what worries me.
I agree. Anyway, it's we are certainly living in very interesting times.
Yeah. All right. We'll leave it there. Let me just go through the live stream and make sure we got everything. Annie says, I'm trying to ask a question. Annie, put that question in there really quick in the live stream. Give you a few seconds if you can get that question in there. We'll try to answer it, and that'll be the last question, and we'll sign out. Thank you to everyone on Locals as well. Guys, Locals is blowing up. A lot of great conversations taking place there, and a lot of great content that is being put on Locals. So definitely check us out on Locals, the Duran.locals.com. And Alexander, you have a crystal clear image now. So you have a really nice sweatshirt with the flag of Scotland there. I can even see the flag. That's how crystal clear you are. And I've got a mug with the flag of Serbia. You have a hat with, I think it's Austria. Is that not?
I think
or Italy? No, it looks like Italy.
I think it's Italy, exactly.
I've got Switzerland.
It's the tricolore flag, exactly.
Yeah, I've got Switzerland right here. Yeah. The tricolore. Yes, tricolore. That's awesome. Great flag.
Oh, absolutely. And Italy has a good national anthem too, by the way, I would say.
Yeah, Italy does have a nice national anthem. Expected. Fantastic music from Italy. So I think it's not a surprise that their national anthem would be top notch. All right, we'll end it there. I don't see the question from Annie. We'll leave it there. And thank you very much once again to our moderators. Valley S, Reckless Abandon, Zarael, Alan, Cosmic Rain. Did I forget anybody? If I forgot anybody that was helping us moderate, please forgive me. Please forgive me. I know not what I do. That's a Brian Adams song, Alexander. All right, everybody, take care, and we'll be back with some really good videos coming up. And Alexander also has some great videos coming up on Locals, the Duran.locals.com. Take care, everybody.